The StrutFit Show, bringing retail into the future.
Hello and welcome to the StrutFit Show. I'm your host, Nayyar. I'm also the CEO of StrutFit, where our vision is the same as the vision for this show, to bring retail into the future. Every episode, I'll be joined by a guest who is leading or innovating in some part of the retail spectrum, from design to manufacturing to marketing and even to sales. We'll discuss trends, learnings, and ideas, and really try to figure out what the top performers in your field are doing. Along the way, we'll discover some lessons you can apply to your own career and hopefully even have some fun. All right, let's do it. Hello and welcome to the StrutFit Show. I'm here with Andrew Sharp, who's the CEO of Bobax. I think before we jump in here, I'll just give some context of how we met and the origin story of, I guess, StrutFit and me and Bobax. So actually, I don't even know if you know this, but you were speaking, well, you know that you were speaking at the Auckland Chamber of Commerce, but my dad was like, hey, you should go along to this thing. There's this guy speaking about shoes. And at the time we were trying to make tailored shoes for men. Do you remember that part?
Yeah, I remember that part, yeah.
So we were trying to make tailored shoes for men.
Well, not the bit that your dad said, but I remember that you'd come up and you were looking at the tailored shoes for men.
Yeah, I didn't even want to go because my dad was like, I was like, this is children's shoes and we're trying to make tailored shoes for men. I don't know if this is going to be useful. But I went along, spoke to you afterwards, and then you said, hey, I was like, can you make tailored shoes at scale? And you said, maybe, but we're actually really interested in your technology. And at the time I was like, okay, yeah, cool. But then the CEO of Overland said the same thing. Said, hey, I don't know if you can make tailored shoes at scale, but we're really interested in technology. And eventually we listened, and ended up pivoting to what we're doing now. So that's how we first met.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting when you come across those moments of insight, whether they're your own, divine to you from somewhere or someone gives it to you. And obviously I would listen to the Overland guy more than us, but I think, in your life, you always come across those pivot points and hopefully you're paying attention because those are the ones that really change your life. And so, look, obviously I'm stoked that you did listen to those moments in your own life and obviously we met. So good.
Yeah, and it's been smooth sailing from there. Wow, it's been a journey. But yeah, so the StrutFit Show, the premise of the StrutFit Show is to speak to people from all aspects of footwear retail. So that'll be from like conceptual design to marketing, or to manufacturing, to the marketing, then to the selling, and then e-commerce, and in store, and how that's all changing. I'm finding that there's various different aspects of innovation, but they're quite siloed and no one's talking about it. So the purpose of StrutFit is to bring footwear retail into the future, and one aspect of that is the education part. So yeah, I think you would be really good for talking about brand and how to actually scale a footwear company.
Cool. And
how a small footwear company can take on some of the biggest ones in the world.
Yeah, no, great. Looking forward to it. Thanks for having me.
Cheers. So I think a good place to start would be perhaps your own journey and how you ended up in footwear and at Bobax.
Yeah, so pretty weird journey, to be fair, and probably not the typical way that most people get to this point in the footwear industry. I'm an engineer by training and food engineer. Many engineers will be sitting there going, not real engineer. But so we were trained to make food systems, both products, but also systems like heat exchangers and so on. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I finished there, I made it into the Toyota graduate program. And so went from designing food systems into supply chain management with a car company and learning the Toyota way, which was just a phenomenal experience and education. And then various roles from there. So Bobax is actually the 8th different industry that I've worked in.
I knew there was a lot. I didn't realize it was 8.
Yeah. Eight industries, plus a couple of charities that we've started along the way. And and it's been a pretty awesome area. Started 2 businesses, sold one, the other one didn't work. A couple of charities that worked and one that didn't. And so it's been an interesting time.
Sweet. And you joined Bobax 4 years ago now?
Yeah, 4 years ago in November. And so I'm loving the shift. So coming from a very engineering based role in the last couple of roles actually with electronics distributors and electronics manufacturers into a design space and into a really much, Bobax is very much a design and marketing company. And so when we look at what we do, we outsource a lot of the technical elements of manufacturing, but we design everything in-house and we market pretty much everything in-house as well.
Sweet. And how would you describe at a high level, what Bobax does?
Yeah, so we make the best shoes in the world for growing feet. We started 28 years ago. And maybe if I give you the story of that first, and then I'll lead into what we do.
Sounds good.
So Chris Bennett, our founder, was putting some shoes onto his daughter, Chloe. And like all good little toddlers, every time he got to that ultimate moment of tying the shoelace up, she'd kick her feet out of the way and then just start giggling. And he started getting more and more frustrated because they were late to get out the door. And so he walked into the kitchen with the shoes, got a pair of scissors, cut the shoelaces out, and then stuck a rubber band through the eyelets. The shoe went on, and it stayed on, and he was like, maybe there's something here. Went away, sort of thought, well, what does a good shoe for a kid, what should it be? Mm-hmm. And it should be lightweight, breathable, and flexible. And then went and had a look at Chloe's wardrobe, and none of her shoes were like that. They were just these chunky bricks that weren't really helping her in any way to develop her feet as she was walking. And so when a child is born, they don't have any muscles and they don't have many bones. It's mostly cartilage and fat. And over the first 8 years, the feet actually develop into our feet. Mm-hmm. And then from there, they just grow. But the bones are actually, at that point, they're at the right density and so on. And so you can actually bend the bones of a foot.
Bend the bones?
Yeah, of a child's foot.
Okay.
Yeah, which is pretty intense. I don't suggest anyone does that.
Yeah.
But I mean, you will have possibly seen pictures of Japanese geisha and how their feet have been bound when they were children and pulled into what that was deemed as cute. It's horrendous for the child and then later the adults. Feet, ankles, knees, hips, backs, the amount of problems that causes. And so it's kind of like, I guess you're putting a little cage around something that needs to splay, that needs to grow, that needs to have that flex point. And if you think about how a bone is expanding and growing and starting to calcify, it needs that space to be able to do that without being stopped. Because if you stop it, then it's going to increase brittleness and so on.
Yeah, and so this is for, you think normal shoes are doing this, not just the binding process? Yeah.
Sorry, this is just normal shoes in general. So the binding process itself is a horrendous practice.
Yeah,
but in terms of just how a foot should grow and how certain shoes and certain brands, which I won't go into, cage that foot and don't allow it to grow. Yeah. But in the same way, sometimes parents, and this is where the StrutFit app is so awesome, is because you want to make sure that your foot, the child's foot, has enough room at the end of it to grow and to do that splay. And if you're not checking how much space you've got at the end of the shoe, your child's probably not necessarily going to tell you. They might tell you their shoes aren't very comfortable, or they might kick them off. So that's that side. So that's kind of where I guess Bobax started. Chris went away. He was an architect, went and designed the pattern. I think he grabbed one of his wife Colleen's handbags, cut it up, which didn't make him the
Was she happy about that?
No, he wasn't the most popular person. But then 28 years later, she's pretty happy with the outcome.
True.
So that's where we started. We're very much focused on how do we help children have the most comfortable shoes that they can wear. At the same time, they have to be beautiful. I mean, you can't put kids in or put anyone in a product that looks ugly and expect them to love it. There's no brand love there. And so we make sure that there's a mixture of form and function as we're going through.
Cool. So I've heard previously that what children's shoes used to be like, and perhaps still are, except for Bobax, is adult shoes but scaled down. I think you said this. How is Bobax sort of combating that? What's the philosophy behind the Bobax shoes, and I guess how do you make sure it's actually good for the child?
Yeah, so I mean, if you go back to that very first shoe, how Chris did it was he traced Chloe's foot and then cut out the pattern based on her foot. And so it's actually made for her. So, you started, your original journey was very much about bespoke, tailored shoes like a suit, but for your shoes, right? And that's essentially how we started in the first journey. So then we measured truckloads of kids' feet to see, what are kids' feet? How are they? So when a child is born or when they're young, their feet are triangles.
They're triangles?
Yeah. So
the heel is the bottom?
The heel is the bottom.
Yeah.
And then the toes are flat.
Okay.
And then over the first sort of couple of years, it it balances out and looks more like a foot. And it's interesting because at the age of 2, the foot looks quite normal and the kid will be walking or running around. And so you think, sweet, healthy foot, but done. But that foot is still very flexible and very susceptible to change. Not naturally, but in terms of, we can change it by having an angle of the shoe that's wrong. So you see these little girls wearing high heels with points.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Paris in particular. We struggle in Paris because our shoes are quite, they call them bulbous because they're shaped for the child's foot.
Yeah.
And the mum doesn't want her child wearing that because it doesn't look pretty like what she's wearing, which is high heels. And so these little 2-3-year-old girls wearing, and they're beautiful shoes, but they're terrible for their feet.
Absolutely.
And so that's a problem of education that we probably haven't got across well enough in Paris. Whether we ever will, who knows?
Well, okay. That's interesting. And so started from New Zealand. Now it's how many places around the world?
Yeah, so we sell, depending on what metrics you look at, we sell to retailers in 40 countries.
Yeah.
Obviously, we sell online, so we're everywhere. But retailers in 40 countries, we've got 20 countries that we do volume that's significant in. Our biggest market is Australia right now. UK is number 2 and Italy is number 3. So we sell leather shoes to Italy, which is quite cool.
Yeah, I mean that's
from New Zealand.
Exactly, that's bad. Okay.
And so it's been going well. We're 10% of our sales are in New Zealand, but most of our focus is offshore. We've got some very big focus in Germany and the US right now.
Right, and you're competing with some of the biggest brands. And not only competing, but winning when we look at some of the awards coming out. Perhaps you could speak to the awards and then let's talk about how does a small company compete with some of these behemoths? Yeah,
absolutely. So I guess awards is always nice. And I suppose when we think about it, as I said before, we're a marketing and design business is kind of what we are. I think a lot of people forget the last word of that, which is the business part.
Right.
So marketing and award and design awards are great. And we want them because we're an award-winning company, but we're a business. And so when we look at a different metric, which I'll start with, and then I'll come back to the awards, we've over 10x'd the market for the last 4 years. So the market has been growing at a very, very low rate, and we've been growing in over double digits. And
wow. Okay, wait, hang on. So you're saying children's market as a whole hasn't grown that much, but Bobax share is just increasing that.
Correct. Yeah. So we've been taking share off our competitors. It's been very interesting looking at some of the other businesses that we compete with. And these are businesses that are huge, like, big, almost bigger than the GDP of New Zealand type thing.
Wow.
Not quite, but but it sort of feels that way when you're competing against them and they throw their marketing budget against you.
Sure.
And we've been told that, for example, one of our competitors tried to poach one of our designers, and she went up there to have a look. And when she walked into the design lab, they said, what we want you to do is copy these 15 shoes. 7 of them were Bobax. And she's like, I designed those like 2 years ago. And they were like, yes, that's great. So you easily copy them. And so obviously she didn't leave. But it's very interesting that that's their philosophy. And so as I say, the children's shoe market has been growing in the 1% to 2% worldwide. And so we've been growing up in the double digits. So that's part of it. And we're competing with the biggest in the world. I mean, we're competing with the Nikes of the world, right? Not so much in this really small kids, so in babies and early toddlers. But definitely once a kid gets to sort of 3, 4, sees what dad's wearing, pair of Nikes, I want a pair of Nikes. Sees what mum's wearing, pair of Adidas, I want a pair of Adidas. And so there's a tough market in that space because when you're competing with someone like Nike who spends that much money on their marketing and does an amazing job and is just a phenomenal company. I was fortunate enough to go up and spend some time with them a couple of years ago, and they sort of just gave me some ideas.
While you were at Bobax?
While I was at Bobax, yep. So that was through the Kiwi network, and they sort of just gave us some tips and pointers of maybe how we could start looking at things, and it was just amazing. So that's nice. come back to the awards there. Yes, I mean, we win at the moment. I think we're up for about 12 different awards. We've won 3 or 4 this year so far.
Wow.
Around the different parts of the world. So innovation in Germany, best children's shoe brand in the UK.
Best children's shoe brand in the UK.
Yeah. Which we've been up for the last couple of years. And so I mean,
and you finally cracked it this year.
Well, I don't know yet. We haven't won that yet. That's in September. We find out.
Sweet.
Yeah. So it's that sort of stuff that we're really excited about. Some awards in Australia, of New Zealand. We win some awards, and then the US.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very exciting sort of time. And I guess when you want to be an award-winning brand, you've got to kind of keep pushing the boundary a little bit as to what you can do, and I guess following in some great footsteps from a marketing perspective with the likes of Jeff Ross and 42 Below and things. There's elements of that we can take away to see how did they crack their market, understanding their customers, and then engaging with them in the way that aligned the values.
Right.
And that's what we sort of try and really focus on, particularly with our marketing and storytelling.
Cool. And when you talk about values and brand, what are the Bobox values, and how did they come about? And was there like market research done? How do you make sure that it resonates with your customers?
Yeah, it was really interesting. So values, it's interesting. I think leadership in general, there's lots of different, thousands of books and lots of different podcasts and things about leadership. And I'll get to your question in a sec. But leadership to me is very much about understanding the vision and having a shared vision that engages your customers, engages your staff, and engages yourself and obviously your shareholders and other stakeholders. And so that's part of leadership. And so we worked a lot on that. Then getting a set of values, both current and aspirational. And I think that's the bit that people struggle with sometimes is this is what we want to be, but then what your values are to your customers is what you are. And so you can have both.
Okay.
And I think people focus on one and not the other and ignore the other sometimes. They focus on, well, this is what we are, and rather than this is what we could be. Or they focus on what this is what we could be and ignore what they currently are, which means that it doesn't resonate with the consumer and with your customers, because they go, no, you're not. And so I'll give you some of our examples. We've got 4 main values. One of them is being a global community. All right. So we sell into retailers in 40 countries. We need to make sure that we're designing product for each of those markets. We need to make sure that we're telling stories in the way that each of those markets resonates with. So I'll give you an example where we got this horrendously wrong at one point. We came up with this tagline, which was about letting your child be free, letting them be a child, letting them be young. And so we called it Bobax Be Young. And so I was reasonably new into the company. I got the pitch. I was like, yeah, this is great. Took it up to Germany, and they just sat there and went, there's the mums that we were doing the focus group with. Does this resonate, this tagline? And I was like, well, hang on, you guys are selling children's shoes. Yeah. But of course then it's for young people. This is stupid. You guys are stupid. And I was just going, no, it's about letting your children be young. Yeah, but they are young, they're children. And so they were so literal about what it was. And I was just like, oh. Then I went to France, and this mum just burst into tears. And I was just going, oh, what have I done here? And she said, so now that I'm a mum, I'm old. And I was like, no. It's like allowing your child to be free and to run around and play and be young. But that was gone. So that was a really bad instance of where we didn't understand our global community well enough. And so we're probably aspirationally a really global community. We're a global company based in New Zealand. I worry sometimes that we don't think enough about that. My general manager in Europe is based in Copenhagen in Denmark, and we've got staff in all over the rest of the world. But I think they struggle with us a little bit because Kiwis are odd. I love being a Kiwi. I love New Zealand, but we're an odd people. We have a weird sense of humor. We're quite quirky, which I think plays quite well in the States. Yeah. But in certain markets, it really doesn't. Like, in the US, they love the quirkiness. But in Germany, when we've been speaking with them, they say you're doing something very important here in terms of building product for children. Your flippant attitude doesn't cut it. And so you've got to just tweak what that means for each of the different markets.
I wonder how someone like, say, Allbirds, because Allbirds is doing very well in the States.
Yeah.
I don't know how they're doing in Europe. Do you think they're facing similar? Because they are very quirky in the way they market as well.
Totally. And I will imagine that they are having many of the same issues that we face. I know that their sales in Europe are only just starting. They're not focused as much there. So they did it amazingly well. They started in San Francisco and made sure they understood San Francisco. And then they went to LA and made sure they got LA. And then they started spreading across the US. New Zealand is a pretty easy market to throw some volume down to be fair, because we'll give stuff a try down here. But I think that's an interesting part, and their strategy was really good in that they started very local, and then they went and figured out, all right, what do we need to be? Who do we need to be that's going to resonate with the customer and the end consumer? What sort of messaging do they want to get from us? What sort of product how should it look? And then they got themselves into the Silicon Valley set. And then it just took off, right?
Silicon Valley set is right. I saw this. I don't know if I've shown you this. The VC starter kit. Is if you Google it, it'll come up. But it's VCs being venture capitalists, and it's like 0 to 1 book, Patagonia vest, and Allbirds shoes. Like they all wear the same thing. Definitely crack that.
And that's it. And so they started there, and so strategically, they were very focused on that to start with. As they've got to a certain point, they've tried other things. But they started very, very narrow, and then that's enabled them to expand. And so then I think that's that process for them for Europe now is going and being on the ground in Europe, understanding Europe. I think they've just started a shop in London to try to get an understanding of London and of the UK market.
You would hope London is pretty similar to the States, and like maybe halfway between Europe and the States.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything's got similarities. And we're, as a human race, we are, 90-something% the same. Right? So it's about understanding the differences. And if you can figure out the differences, then you can scale and you can grow. And so I think that's that thing that they'll do. And they'll do it particularly well. Tim he's a very, very smart guy. We've got a good designer in Jamie. And so, yeah, I think I hope they do really well. I love their shoes. They're really, really comfy.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
I'm going to get a pair once we sign them. That's
right.
There's all these shoes I want to buy, but I'm like, we'll sign them and then we'll get the shoes.
Fair enough.
So you were brought on initially to scale the company.
Yep.
What's that process been like? If someone is trying to scale their own company, what sort of challenges should they be expecting?
Yeah.
Big question. We can break that down.
Yeah, depends on where you're coming from, how fast you want to go, and what your base is, I guess, in terms of capital base and resources are. So we had a phenomenal company in terms of Chris and Colin had just built this just awesome brand that had great product, maybe a little bit disjointed in certain elements of it, and the storytelling was getting better, but good people, great brand, good product. I think they just got to a point where they were flip-flopping through decisions because they didn't know anymore and they were confused, and so and that happens when you've been in a business for 25 years, right?
Sure.
Because you've tried stuff, and then you have that whole I've tried that before.
Right, and it didn't work, and maybe it was timing, but it was good.
And the amount of success stories, biographies are only written by the people that have won.
Yeah,
right.
Sure.
And they leave out all the times that they tried something and it didn't work. Most of them do.
Yeah.
And most of their stories are about, I saw this thing and I was a visionary and I came through and it was amazing and look how good I am. And you're going, well, that's not really what happened. Like, you tried 3 things. This one thing kind of happened and then you took off. And I think that's the challenge. That's where we were at. So we'd had 8 years of sub 2% growth on market trend. Basically, we were growing with the market, trying to add new markets, all those sorts of things. And so I was living in Sydney at the time, and they asked me to come back home. So I am a Kiwi, and scale it sort of as fast as they could. maybe this is the point where you come to the founder's dilemma. What do you want? There was a great article a long time ago in Harvard Business Review called The Founder's Dilemma. And the founder needs to understand, what do they want? Do they want the control and the power, or do they want the money? And this is what the article's saying. And provided, if you want the control and the power, then there's certain things you won't give up. If you want the money, then there's certain things you have to give up.
Right.
And that's that control and the power to someone who can come in and do things. Because they're going to change it.
The person who comes in is going to change it.
Totally.
Yeah. And it's very rare. I mean, we know these examples because it's just very rare where a founder founds a company and then takes it up, like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. It's just very rare to have a founder because every step of the company is so different. It's like the person who founds it may not be able to scale it, may not be able to run a company which is IPO'd.
Yep, 100%. And even, all of that process. And I think that's where we got to, was that Chris was a visionary in starting the business, and Colin together, they just were a formidable team coming through. And then we sort of branched out into shoes, and then all sorts of challenges came through that, and it was good, and everything was going pretty well. But they just couldn't figure out, how do you break through that next thing? And a lot of time it is just that fresh thinking of stuff that they'd probably already tried. And I remember coming in, and I think we were doing something like 10% of our sales were online. And I said, I reckon we'll easily double that in a few years. And I was told in no uncertain terms, no company can get through 15%, the 15% ceiling. Blah, 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 blah. Pumpkin Patch has done the study, and Icebreaker, and da-da-da-da. And I was like, okay, interesting. Oh, I'm going to try anyway. And and now we're well through that and continuing to grow. So I think, it is a lot of timing. It's a lot of luck. Have you done the right thing at the right time? And when
you say right thing at the right time, is that because you can like prepare for something? Because if an opportunity comes up and you're not ready for it, you've missed it, and you somehow have to predict that and get ready for it, so that when it comes, you can take advantage.
So it's interesting. I think there's an interesting point there, right? And when I was trying to understand culture at Bobax, and I was trying to build the culture that I needed for us to scale, one of the things I wrote down was an interdependent team that can work with each other to not be the best, to not predict the wave that's coming, but to be able to surf anything that does. And so predicting waves is hard, right? I mean, there's, how many times do you hear a new prediction? Apparently this was going to happen, this was going to happen, this was going to happen, and then none of them do. So we're waiting for this crash, right? This economic crash that we're waiting on, that's been 4 years, I think, overdue right now. It will happen. I guarantee it will. But people have been predicting when it's going to happen for the last 4 years. Oh, it's next year. Oh, it's 6 months away. And then it just hasn't quite occurred yet. Now, as I say, it will happen. And so what you need to be able to do is be prepared that when it happens, you need to be able to change your focus, change what you're doing very quickly, and pile in behind that new strategy that you quickly decide what it is that's going to see through this wave, because you don't know what it looks like. I mean, who would have predicted Brexit 3.5 years ago, 4 years ago?
Yeah.
Who would have predicted Trump 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, right? You just wouldn't.
Simpsons. He was on Simpsons as a president, but aside from that, Simpsons predicts everything.
They actually, that's. But again, even that, right? How many other presidents have they had that they've predicted?
Yeah, exactly.
That didn't go on. And that's what I mean. I think predictions are, oh, see, I predicted that in 1995. And go, okay, cool. What else did you predict in 1995? Oh, these things. Oh, none of those things happened. So you see, they just focus on the one that did. So I think that's the challenge there is when you're scaling, you do have to be ready, but you do have to be just ready to adjust and adapt. And I think the challenge right now is that that's speeding up. Right, the rate of change is just way, way faster than 20 years ago. Right, 20 years ago when I first started in business, it was pretty pedestrian. Like you think about it, right? We didn't have smartphones. Email was there, but it wasn't dramatically fast. I remember having teleconferences with Japan, and it was just so slow, and it dropped out 5 or 6 times. And so one hour teleconference would take 3 hours.
Wow.
And so that was a very interesting sort of change for us. And that's just a tech change. But if you think about the psychological changes that we've had to go through, the personality changes that we've had to go through, that we're always on and we're always expected to be on, and that we're getting 1,000 messages a minute. It's a pretty dramatically different world. So you have to be able to and choose people and build a culture that can adapt to that pretty quickly. And I think at the same time, be resilient enough that when stuff does happen, they don't fall apart.
Yeah.
And that's the big challenge at the moment.
And is that resilience at an individual level, or is it resilience at a systems level?
Both, I think. So we call it our model is called the 4 C's. So essentially, how we scale is 4 C's. So clarity. Do you understand what we are trying to do as a business? Do you understand what you have to do in that? Do you understand what your team has to do? Do they understand what they have to do? Right. So clarity, very important. Are you all on the same page and pushing in the same direction? Culture. How are we within each other? Right. How are we acting to each other? How are we acting within us and our customers? Do we understand the cultural differences and subtleties that we need to make sure that we resonate with them? Technical competence. Are we actually good at our job? And so some of that, in terms of ability to adapt, is about technical competence. How fast can you learn? Because if you're slow to learn and you're slow to see this thing was there but now it's there, you miss it. And then you're struggling to catch up. And then emotional competence. So that's how are you within yourself? Are you strong? Are you resilient? Are you able to adapt? Do you freak out when someone says some little bad word to you? Do you fall to pieces? Right? And to be fair, I think for New Zealand, I think this is our biggest concern right now.
Emotional competence and
resilience.
Right.
Yeah, I very much worry about where we are at as a culture. And
why do you think that is? Because I thought, why do you think that is? Because there's that tall poppy syndrome, which is a thing, but that would almost make the tall poppies more resilient. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I really struggle with why. So I mean, I say, you've started a business and you sort of alluded to it earlier, right? The journey is not an easy one, and I would hazard a guess that that you'll have friends or colleagues or people that you went to school with and things like that if they were in the same boat would have thrown in the towel long ago.
Yeah, facts.
Right? And we have that sometimes at Bobax, sometimes where a process is not going as smoothly as it should. And it's sort of almost, we'll throw my hands up, someone else needs to fix this for me. It's like, no, you need to fix this because that's your job, but I don't know how. Learn. And this is that debate. And then emotionally they fall apart, and then they're not operating at an optimal level. Their health starts to suffer, and then from there on it sort of spirals downwards. So you've got to actually then go around and coach them and bring them back up to get them to a positive mental state, help them work on their physical health, and in that sense then they can then resume normal sort of practice.
I see.
And I struggle with that, and I sit there and I'm not great with this sort of thing. I'm very poor at praise. I'm very poor at when people look like they're falling apart, and I look at it and I go, why are you falling apart? And I call it false weakness, for example. Like it frustrates me, and it's a challenge that for me, and I have to change myself.
What do you mean by
here.
False weakness?
Well, when they're being weak, but they don't need to be.
I see. Okay.
So, when you sit
it's
there
like
and
they have the capability to overcome it.
They are smart people.
Yeah.
They could sit down and think about it for 5 minutes and solve the problem. But instead of that, they throw the problem at someone else, and that becomes their problem. And that, I think, particularly in this world that's getting faster and faster, the more problems you get thrown at you from other people, the less time you actually get to spend on solving your problems.
Yeah.
And so that increases the pressure on you and so on. So that's a challenge. And I don't know, and maybe it's an issue of coaching. We're not particularly good coaches, perhaps, in this country. We are very, and maybe that's it. Maybe it's my attitude that is the problem, because I sit there as a leader looking at it going, why don't you just fix that? Why don't you just solve it? Like, why do you need me to solve that problem? if you two are having a disagreement, why do I need to be here to mediate it?
Yeah.
Like, can't you be adults about it and have that discussion?
Sure.
And this is not a Bobax thing. This is
It's just in general,
in life.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I don't think we've got that ability anymore. We don't seem to talk to each other.
Now, we as in
Kiwis. Yeah.
Which country is doing it well? I don't have as much global experience, but you've worked in a number of places.
Yeah. I think in the States they do it pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
They're pretty frank with a lot of their communication. They'll tell you pretty quickly if you're not right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, at least where I've been anyway. The States is a big place.
True.
Aussie, Sydney in particular, does it very well. They'll tell you very fast that you're doing something poorly and you need to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
London does it pretty well, I think, from my experience. So these are the places, and you say Germany is another one that obviously our office is in Hamburg.
Yeah.
And they'll tell you pretty
Germany
quickly.
as a whole.
The Germans as a whole, as I say, it's a massive generalization, but they seem to be pretty emotionally aware of themselves and what they're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so that's sort of it. So I don't know whether it's an empathy issue. I don't know whether it's a coaching issue. I don't know whether what the problems are there.
Mm-hmm.
But these are things that we've got to work as a society and as a culture. And I've sort of put it back to just New Zealand. But yeah, I mean, it's something that does need to be worked on for us as a country.
And I know at Bobax you were trying to, because I was at Bobax for a year. I don't think we made that clear, but I was leading technology there for a year. And it was awesome because I got to see what is it like on the other side. And now when I go have these discussions with some very big companies, I can be like, actually, I know what your problems are. I know that you probably don't have resource in terms of staff, but you'll have money and then we can work with that. Or, you're probably not going to have a lot of tech. There's all these big companies, none of them have tech. Like retail is so tech light. It's ridiculous, but we're going to change that. So having been at Bobax, I know one of your principles was constant improvement. Mm-hmm. How does that tie into sort of technical competence and being ready for changes which may occur?
Yeah, totally. So Kaizen, coming from Toyota, is very much a huge part of what we're trying to do. 1% improvements made every day. You're 3,000% better off at the end of the year type thing.
Mm-hmm.
Look, I think you've got to do that. Technical competence is about how you are getting ready for your job and for your future and to do what we need you to do. Now, so we have an education budget, for example, that we've tripled in the last couple of years.
Okay. Is that a group thing or is it an individual?
Well, both. I mean, so you bring it to us, say, hey, look, I really want to go and learn about whatever. Mm-hmm. And then we, great, awesome. Off you go then. And so whether that's an agile manufacturing course, whether that's looking at lean processes, whether that's looking at leather courses, whether that's all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. We've had everything down to health and safety. We say, actually, we want to go and do a first aid course. Sweet, great, off you go.
Nice.
And so I think that's a big part of it is how do you continue to upskill? And I think the successful people going forwards in life are going to be the ones that are learning every day, right? And if you stop learning, then you'll start going backwards pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And then I think the businesses that survive are going to be very much the businesses that have that premise of how do you continue that learning journey every day. And so one of our values is be curious, right? So it's about every day ask questions about why is this way? Why is this customer saying this? Why do these customers think differently? Is the German foot the same as the American foot?
We'll be able to tell you that soon.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking forward to. And that's that element, right? Is if we can get a really positive culture of curiosity that comes through, and you're asking questions that enhance the business's intelligence, it enhances the business's IP, mm-hmm. right? It enhances the business's value. And so that's a huge thing for us in terms of how we operate. And again, that comes into that technical competence mostly, but not just that. I mean, it is obviously part of being clear. Mm-hmm. If you're not clear, ask a question. If you're struggling with something personally, mentally, ask some questions, ask for help.
That's almost the clarity coming into it as well. It's like emotional competence and clarity combined.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a huge thing for us. And again, we are competing with the biggest brands in the world, right? These are absolute household names that you could pretty much go anywhere in the world and they'll tell you about Nike. They'll tell you about Adidas. They might tell you about Clark's. And so with that sort of basis, we're competing against them. If we're going to try and beat them, we're not going to try. If we're going to beat them, then we need to be better and add more value to our customers at that point. How do we do that? We need to understand our customer. How do we do that? We ask them questions. So that's that curiosity. And so that's that education side. And that's, I think for me, that continued education, continued improvement. You don't have to do everything all at once, right? I think maybe that's part of the issue as well. We've got such a big mountain to climb, but you don't jump up to the top of the mountain, right? You just walk one step at a time and you just keep going with resilience, with grit, with determination, and you get there. And that's the key.
And you mentioned some of those values, like resilience and the grit.
Yep.
I've done this with a number of teams I've led, and it wasn't my idea, but I was like, hey, this is what I want to achieve. And I went to someone who does executive coaching. It's like, how do I get this instilled in the team? And he came up with a method of like crowdsourcing an operational model. So it's basically like, what's our vision? What's our goals? What capabilities do we need to get to those goals? Results, like what does success look like? And so we got Post-it notes anonymously. Everybody crowdsourced it, and we pulled it together. And in the end, it's basically what would have occurred had I simply told them.
Yeah.
But because everybody had built it together, they bought into it. And that year we had like the highest retention in terms of staff, and people stayed on for another 4 years after I left, where the previous year, it was only me who came back.
Right.
So that was really powerful. And I've used it for everything as well. And we've used it at StrutFit.
Is that how you became CEO?
Oh, well, that was a velocity. Maybe. There weren't a lot of people which applied that year, but I was the best of the worst.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's exactly how we did our values as well. We did exactly the same process, actually. And so it was very much everyone just wrote out, what do I want? What are we? And what do we want to be? And then put them all up, group them into sort of areas. And then we had our wordsmith team, our marketers, basically go away and say, does this mean what you guys have said? And then we tested it with them, and it took I think it ended up taking about 3 or 4 months to get it right.
Yeah.
But then once you get it down to that point, we've got the 4 main values, which really resonate with all of the team because it came from them.
Right.
Yeah.
How does that change? Because you're scaling and every time I jump in, there's a new person in the office.
Yeah.
How do you, in terms of hiring, are you hiring and looking for people that fit that model, or people come on and then later you might revise that model? What does that look like?
So scaling is, to me, and I'm going to say this is only my view of it, and I would say this is the whatever it was, 2 scale jobs and 1 big turnaround where the business was failing. So I took a business that was they had $40 million Aussie, $4 million loss, and they were $28 million in debt. And we turned that around in 3 years, paid off all the debt, made it profitable, and won some big contracts. And so they're still going really, really strongly now. And that was a huge challenge in that space of looking at the culture, because the first thing I had to do was that we had 150 staff and I had to fire 100 of them. So my first 3 months,
that sounds horrible.
I went over with brown hair, and 3 months later pretty much had grey hair. So that sort of concept. So when you look at that, one of the things I learned at that point was I didn't cut deep enough. Right. So the changes that needed to be made. Actually,
what do you mean by cut deep enough?
So we removed 100 staff. There were probably another 10 that were very, very toxic to the community and the engagement level in the rest of the business that I should have also removed. But I was fearful that their skill sets, their technical skill sets, couldn't be replaced. And so I kept them, and they probably made me take another year to get to where we got to in the end.
Wow.
And so when I look at elements of scaling with Bobax, as I say, we went from a very flat growth trajectory where we had staff that their job was to make sure that our costs were under control, and that was their whole job.
Which is like capping the downside?
Capping the downside, which is fine, and you need to do that obviously because you've got to make sure your costs are under control. But at the same time, they weren't they weren't looking at opportunities. They weren't looking at how do we make the service better. So once I sort of said, look, we're starting to grow now. Now I want to change provider over here because their service levels aren't good enough. And we need to increase our service levels, our DIFOT and so on to our customers. They need to get their goods.
What does DIFOT mean?
Sorry, delivery in full on time.
Okay.
It's a supply chain term. So making sure that they get their goods on time, basically, and the whole, if they ordered 3 pairs, they get all 3 pairs, not 2 pairs.
Yeah, things which customers would expect now.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, they've always kind of expected that, but courier companies didn't have to necessarily do it before. Sure. And so we weren't able to. They weren't able to make that shift, that mental shift from cut down to all right, service levels up. And what I should have done at that point was say, hey, this isn't what we need done anymore. If we can't make this work together, let's help you find where you need to be. Because as I say, what it actually happens is then it causes this tension. And it's not a positive tension. It's the really negative tension because essentially they don't believe in what you're trying to do because they have a different mindset. And so when we hire, we're very much focusing on, will they fit the team? Now, do they have the skill sets? Obviously, they can't start the job without the skill sets, but will they fit the team? And so I think when we hired you, it was very much, I think we were talking about it and I said, look, come and work for us while you're starting to think about how StrutFit can go. And you said, what am I going to do? And I was like, I don't know yet. Right?
Basically, yeah.
That was the job description was, I don't know yet. We'll just kind of sit over there and someone will start bringing you work. And then you completely revolutionized our tech stack and the opportunity for that for us, which was awesome. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity.
No, it was good. And, but I mean, that was the thing because you fit our culture. Right, you understood the values, you believed in the values, and then you really fit into that space. And so that's a big challenge because if you hire the wrong person, what it actually does is it devalues all of the other people in the business because they sit there and they try to fit into the whole square peg round hole type thing, and they don't, and that causes this negative tension. Now, I don't mean by fit in being the same as everyone else. I don't mean, you have to be thinking exactly the same way because you need diversity of thought.
Yeah, or everyone be extroverts or something.
Yeah. No, and I don't mean that. I mean you have to have the diversity of thought, but you have to have, do I believe this is the way we can do it? Do I believe in the way that we respect each other here? So, for example, if you're doing something in the tech space that I don't understand, if I'm passive aggressive at all, ever, you're just going to start getting frustrated, right? Because you're the expert in that space. Technically, I might have an idea and I would go, what about this thing? I heard blah, blah, blah. And you go, yeah, but it won't work because of these things. If then I give you the, really? Cool. Right? That just destroys our relationship. And that level of passive aggressive, Kiwis are pretty bad with this. Like we need to get rid of this.
Like we are passive aggressive?
We are very passive aggressive. Okay. Yeah. We don't like to say, I disagree with you because these reasons. We just give it the, really?
Do you think that comes from a good place in that we're trying to avoid conflict perhaps?
I think it does.
Yeah.
But I think, as I say, we're not living in our little bubble anymore. Right. And I think when we were living in our little bubble, avoiding that conflict was fine because there was only 4 million of us and we needed to make sure we got on with everybody. But I think now we live in a global world and we need to make sure that if we're going to compete on that global scale, I'm not saying, throw little grenades into this place all the time because you just like watching stuff blow up. But I mean, say what you think. And if you don't say what you think, then don't expect that other people are going to get it, and don't be annoyed and frustrated with them that they didn't just pick up on your subtle cue.
Right.
Like tell them about it.
Yeah. Take ownership of your own communication.
100%. Yeah. And so that's the bit that we've got to start thinking about. And so so when we hire, we make sure that they fit exactly our culture, and they'll come out and they'll say, yeah, I'm not sure about this color palette or something. Why? Oh, because of these reasons. Okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but I'm going to do it this way. Okay, cool. You're the expert in the space. I'll move on and do my bit. that's the sort of thing that you do, and then say the technical expertise comes in after that.
Okay. And in terms of disagreements, I think we do this pretty well, but like the StrutFit team has known each other for a while.
Yeah.
But where we'll disagree on something, sometimes strongly, but when you decide what the decision is, everybody gets behind it. It's like a board decision, or the way a board should be run, where you'll have disagreements, and then the decision is actually unanimous in the end, and everyone takes ownership of it, and everyone's pulling in the same direction.
Yeah, and that's awesome. Like, I think if you get that, Jamie Fitzgerald did a leadership session with us once, and he was talking about 80% agreement, 100% alignment. Right? So we might disagree even at the end of it, but 80% of the team agree this is the direction, this is the way we should go. I need to then let that go, get behind it and say, all right, that's the way we're going, let's go. And then we go for it. And then the most important bit, if it was wrong and I was right, not lord that over people.
Right.
Because I've seen that happen in other businesses where, well, I knew it wouldn't work. Going, well, good for you. But that doesn't work in the culture.
And doesn't help. Help.
Yeah, exactly.
Ultimately. Yeah. Cool. Where do you see the future for Bobax, or perhaps the footwear industry? I see Nike recently dropped a subscription model, which I know you were talking about. So yeah, I guess where do you see footwear going? To the perhaps not too much detail so people don't copy you, but ideas are a dime a dozen, right? Yeah.
You can copy ideas all day long. It's the execution. So as I say, we've got our competitors, particularly in the UK, copy us all the time. You look at I was in Australia a couple of weeks ago, and I was looking at this shoe, one of our customers, and I was like, oh, here's all our shoes. Oh, and we're also over there. And I went over and I picked it up, and I was like, oh my God, that's not ours. But it was totally ours. I was like, man, that's like a blatant copy.
Yeah.
Look, it's going to happen. And you sort of just got to deal with it. So they might copy the concept, they might copy the idea. Can they copy the execution? Can they copy who you are? And that's where the brand comes in. Like, does the consumer trust them? Now, if the consumer trusts them more than they trust you, then good on them, and they win the sale, right? But so what you want to get to is the customer trusts me. They value what I can give them for the money that they have to spend to get that.
Yeah.
And then we have a relationship, and you can't copy that. Right? You can't copy the relationship level that I have with the customer of ours. So no matter what you do in terms of product or in terms of ideas or concepts.
On that point, I was listening to a podcast, and I'll flick it over to you after this, but it was in the martial arts world. I can't remember the name of the trainer, but he was training with Josh Waitzkin, and they have Josh Waitzkin. Marco, yeah, I know who you mean. But what he was doing was streaming all his training sessions, even like 2 weeks out from a fight.
Yep.
And he says, well, if they're looking at what I'm doing and trying to copy me or try to beat me, they're playing my game.
Yep.
And I'm going to win my game.
Totally. Yeah, which is awesome.
I was like, damn, that's one, that's confidence, and two, that's absolutely right. Like, if they're just copying you, that's fine. You can beat them at that, and you're always going to be ahead of the curve because you're making the curve. Because
we're going forward with new products and things like that. So where's it going? It's a hard question. I think retail will always be around. Like, we will always go to shops. I don't think we'll ever stop going to shops. I think at some point in time, the way that shops deliver the product and the service is going to change. Some of them are already doing it. So, for example, I was at the Auckland airport the other day, and they had a what was it? Whittaker's chocolate had done this awesome little stand, and it was maybe the width of this table, right? And and that was it. And they basically were just doing constant refill from out the back. But then they had hourly drops coming in, apparently, to the airport, so that once they started selling stuff, they could then bring it in from that sort of space.
Okay.
So I think retail is probably going to go towards that. I mean,
smaller stores?
Much smaller stores. Yeah. I mean, you can't afford rent at the moment. I saw this morning that Clark's has asked for a 30% rent reduction in the UK, and they're also going to close a factory. Yeah. Just they can't afford it. All right. It's just too expensive to hold that value, because the landlords aren't aren't looking at what's going on, right? They're not looking at revenue and turnover and foot traffic and so on. They're just looking at how much money they can make out of an asset that they have.
Right.
And so I think what's going to happen is that shops will shrink. Stock will dramatically shrink. There'll be much more click and collect. There'll be much more deliver to home. So what you'll do is, as a consumer, you'll walk into a shop, try stuff on. Yeah, I really like that. Send it home. And then when you get home, it'll be on your doorstep. So within, sub 1 hour couriers to your doorstep. And if you look at what Amazon's doing in the States, they've FedEx has just dropped them because they've seen the writing on the wall that Amazon's just starting to take over in terms of that delivery side as well.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what they're like. So now it's not even just the 2 days on Amazon Prime now. It's I want it same day. And if you can't give it to me same day, I don't want it. And so when we're talking to our warehouse and couriers in the States, it's like, what's your turnaround time? And they're like 3 days, proudly. And we're like, can you get that down? Where are you at? And they're getting really frustrated because they can't. They cannot do it because Amazon have stock closer to the consumer.
Right. They've got a sort of decentralized stocking system.
Totally.
Right.
And we've got one warehouse for all of America based in Texas. And so that's an element that is a real struggle, I think, for retail. And so I think that's where it's going to go, is that you're going to have to split your stock better, which means that we're going to have better stock control, which means that retailers are going to have to start sharing stock levels with brands.
Interesting. Wait, so that means if you as Bobax have, say, 20 retailers in the US, probably much more than that, they all access the same stock. And do they pay upon, how would that work?
So perhaps you're a retailer and I'm a retailer, and I've got a customer that's come in and bought a shoe, but I don't have it, but you do. You send it to me, I give it to the retailer, to the consumer. Okay. Or you send it to me and I send it to their house.
Yeah.
So understanding exactly where all of the stock is. There are brands that do this already, but mostly with their own shops. So, when you go in and you're going to buy something from Three Wise Men, right? And you go, I want this shirt, but I want it in, I don't know, you're probably more like this, in salmon, right?
I do have a salmon shirt.
No, it's not really my color, but yeah. So you'll sit there and go, okay, cool, I want this, and they go, we don't have your size in salmon, but Newmarket does. Would you like us to get it sent to here or to you, or do you want to go and pick it up? Right. So that's because it's their own shops. I think where it's going to go to is that for independent retailers, they're going to need to start thinking about how do they share that back with the brand to say, all right, and now this is going to be good and bad in the sense that it's going to be good because stock levels can be reduced, which reduces the capital intensivity for a retailer, which is good. It reduces the old stock and the amount of sales and things that they have to do, which keeps their margin healthy. But at the same time, they might lose sales because they don't no one has that shoe anymore because it got sold out. Okay. So there's lots of challenges there. So I think that's where retail, I think, is going to go. I don't know how quickly. There's still a big trust issue, I think.
Trust issue between
retailers and brands.
Okay.
And I don't know. We've tried lots of things to help that. Some I think have worked, and some really haven't. But that's innovation, right? You try things, and sometimes it works, and then sometimes it doesn't work. And I think if you hold people just to what didn't work, and you hold that grudge against them without remembering the things that did work to make the service, the process, and the product set better, then you get this low level of trust. So we've got to work out some way to really start building that trust level again, to say, look, just because we're not trying to steal your customers, we're trying to help you protect yourself. How do we help you with social media? How do we help you with stock levels? We've got customers that I've walked into a warehouse the other day of one of our customers. Luckily, none of our shoes, because they'd sold out of all of ours, but there was another brand in there, and it was just chocker. And I said, what's all this? It's the last 3 years worth of this brand's product. Wow. I was like, what are you doing with it? I can't sell it. And it's like, right. And she said, that's why I can't order more from you, unless you give it to me on consignment. And I'm going, well, consignment doesn't really work for us, because obviously then that's just putting all of the risk onto us, and there's still this expectation of the same margins, and that's a challenge. Yeah.
Interesting. And so you're saying, okay, because that's something sort of what we're working on is this information flow between brands and retailers. For example, we were over at one of the largest online retailers in Australia or Australasia, and they sell, I think there's hundreds of brands, and you go online and there's like a size chart for a brand, and some of the information will be there, but there's no incentives to like not have that information there. I think that's more about it's not easy to transfer information and it doesn't live in any centralized place.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're going to allow brands to do is, so you as Bobax can upload all your footwear information because you have that footwear information at a SKU level.
Yep.
So you know how, because your sandals, which are open toe and open backed, fit a size, you would size down.
Correct.
As opposed to a shoe where you just wear your normal size. That's not easily known to most retailers. And you can't really expect them to know.
Yep.
So we're building like a central repository where your resellers would be able to go in and say, this Bobax shoe is this shoe on my website, and then have that information available. And that's one step towards building this brand retailer relationship.
Absolutely. And that's it. I mean, it's this is the thing. This is not this one step to the top of the mountain, right? It's these thousands of little steps along the way that's going to both rebuild that trust with the retail to a lot of brands. And as I say, look, I mean, don't get me wrong, we have amazing relationships with our retail partners. But I've heard some horror stories from them about other brands, and I've been part of disagreements with certain retailers that some of them we've got through it and are rebuilding that trust, and some of them have decided, no, I don't want to do it. One of them couldn't get past the fact that we had a website, right? And
so you just sold your own shoes online?
Yeah, that we sold our own shoes online, and that was a challenge to the point where he couldn't get past it, and he said, well, I'm not going to stock your brand anymore. And we said, look, we appreciate that and understand your point of view. We wish you wouldn't do that, but we understand it. And so, with respect, cool. And so there's elements of that you've just got to start building through, and the tech will help a lot of this. I think there needs to be a little bit more work done at the back end, right? So we need to understand provenance all the way back to the cow or the sheep or whatever.
So traceability of all the materials within it.
Traceability of the materials. Can you see that all of the animals were treated fairly, that the staff were treated fairly along the way, that no one's been, abused or neglected? All of that's going to be much more important in the future. I think at the moment the shoe industry is very much lagging behind a lot of it, and consumers are not willing to. I think the rhetoric is that they care about it, but the other end of it is, but that's your cost to bear.
Right.
We're not willing to pay for it. And then all the brands are sitting there going, okay, we'll try some stuff. And Adidas tried really, really well with the C plastic sole recycled shoe, and then got slammed because essentially only 20% of the sole was actually C plastic, but they called it the C plastic sole recycled shoe or whatever it was called. And you sit there and you go, well, hang on, they still did 20%. Like that's a pretty good effort. And technically, we haven't figured out how to make it 100% yet.
Right.
But the consumer backlash was really vicious against them because I think the public felt that they were getting duped.
Right.
And maybe that's good. So we've got shoes at the moment that have 20% recycled rubber, which is great. What do you call that?
Yeah, how do you talk about
shoe?
that?
Yeah. And so I think there is an element of that. We've got bamboo shoes, bamboo uppers and things like that, which you can dye at home, right? And stuff like that.
Wait, Bobax has that?
Yep. And so it's kind of cool when you sit there and you go, man, that's really cool. So you can take it home, and here's a recipe of taking beetroot and turmeric and some other stuff, and you put it in a pot, boil it down, and you and your kid can dye their shoe, and so on. So stuff like that is good and awesome and heading in the right direction. It's not the one step to the top of the mountain though, right? It's a step along the way. And so you've got to make sure that we're having those discussions and bringing the people along on the journey to say, look, this is what we're trying to do. We're not perfect yet. And I think Allbirds does this really well, actually. They say, we're not there yet, but we're trying. All right, they've with their green EVA soles and so on. I think that sort of concept is really, really positive. It's not perfect. I mean, my Allbirds wear out after sort of 4 months, and I have to throw them away and get a new pair. Right, so that's not overly sustainable, but at the same point, they're trying and they're building more. And the new tree shoes, they are, and so I think each step will get us closer.
Yeah, it sounds like you wear them every day.
Well, not when I'm at work, but yes, every day that I'm not at work. Yeah,
nice.
And when I'm traveling, I do.
Awesome, cool. Those are all the questions I had. But if you have anything else you'd like to just touch on, feel free to do that.
No, I mean, as I say, I just want to say, well, thanks for today, but also really applaud both you for going into business on your own. It's a really hard job. So good on you for that, and make sure you've got the good support network around you.
Definitely. For
those moments that you want to put your head through a wall.
Yeah.
But then also, just really loving how StrutFit's working for us worldwide, and making that consumer choice a bit easier, reducing returns, which reduces emissions and things like that. So, I mean, there's an element of green element there in terms of reducing the emissions through the package going back and forth.
That's right.
So I think these are the things that are important. And again, these are further steps along that journey, that pathway that we all really want to get to the top of the mountain.
And we're finding, I don't know if you saw this, but it was a video which went up on your Instagram of how to use StrutFit. And one of the consumers came back and said, we use this, it worked for all our children, and we found that there was some use remaining in some older shoes because it shows the growth room.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it does. I mean, you can sit there and, as a child, you should have between 10 and 14 millimeters at the end of your shoe, between your toe and the end of the shoe. And so, maybe you've got a pair of shoes that actually we can wear this for another month or so, which then reduces the consumption, which reduces the landfills and all that sort of side of it as well, which is really cool.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on the StrutFit Show.
Good, mate.
And we'll have you back on in a couple of years and see how Bobax is going.
Beauty. And I look forward to it.
Awesome.
Right.
Cheers. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the StrutFit Show. I've been your host, Nayyar. And if you enjoyed it, if you found some parts where you were like, this has added some value to my life, then please share it with a few other people that you think would also value this information or that snippet. And when they like it as much as you did, I'm sure they'll thank you. If you're interested in what we're doing at StrutFit, head to our website at www.strut.fit to learn more and get in touch with us. If you want to get in contact with me directly, you can reach me at ang@strut.fit. All right, that's all, folks. Till next time, take care.